Chapter 25 of the Hampstead Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. The Hampstead Mystery by John Watson and Arthur Rees. Chapter 25. Joe Lever, worn out after nearly a week's work of watching the movements of Mr. Holymead, had fallen asleep in an empty loft above a garage which overlooked Verney's Hotel in Mayfair. He had seen Mr. Holymead disappear into the hotel, and he knew from the experience gained in his watch that the K.C. would spend the next couple of hours in dressing for dinner, sitting down to that meal, and smoking a cigar in the lounge. So Joe had relaxed, for the time being, the new task which his master had set him, and had flung himself on some straw in the loft to rest. He did not intend to go to sleep, but he was very tired, and in a few minutes he was in a profound slumber. In his sleep Joe dreamed that he had attained the summit of his ambition, and was being paid a huge salary by an American film company to display himself in emotional dramas for the educational improvement of the British working classes. In his dream he had to rescue the heroine from the clutches of the villains who had carried her off. They had imprisoned her at the top of a skyscraper building and locked the lift, but Joe climbed the fire escape and caught the beautiful girl in his arms. The villains, who were on the watch, set fire to the building, and when Joe attempted to climb out of the window with the heroine clinging round his neck, the flames drove him back. As he stood there, the wind swept a sheet of flame towards Joe until it scorched his face. The pain was so real that Joe opened his eyes and sprang up with a cry. A man was standing over him, a man past middle age, short and broad in figure, whose clean-shaven face directed attention to his protruding jaw. He was wearing a blue serge suit which had seen much use. "You are a sleeper, sonny," said the man, grinning at Joe's alarm. "But when you wake, why, you wake up properly. I'll say that for you. You nearly broke my pipe. You woke up that sudden." He made this remark with such a malicious grin that Joe, whose face was still smarting, had no hesitation in connecting his sudden awakening with the hot bowl of the man's pipe. It was a joke Joe had often seen played on drunken men in Islington public houses in his young days. "You just leave me alone, will you?" he said, rubbing his cheek ruefully. "It's nothing to do with you whether I'm a sound sleeper or not." "That's just where you're wrong, young fellow," was the reply. "It's a lot to do with me. Ain't your name Joe Lever?" Joe nodded his head. "How did you find out?" he asked. "Perhaps a friend of mine pointed you out to me." "Perhaps he did and perhaps he didn't," said Joe. "Anyway, what's your name?" "Mr. Kemp is my name, my boy, and unless you're pretty civil I'll give you cause to remember it." "What have you got to do with me?" asked the boy in an injured tone. "I've never done nothing to you." "You mind your P's and Q's and me and you'll get along all right," said Mr. Kemp in a somewhat softer tone. "When you ask me what I've got to do with you, my answer is I've got a lot to do with you, for I am your guardian, so to speak." Joe looked at Mr. Kemp with a gleam of comprehension in his amazement. He had some experience in his Islington days of the strange phenomena produced by drink. "Rats!" he retorted rudely. "I've never had a guardian, and I don't want none. What made you a guardian, I'd like to know?" "Your father did," was the reply. "Oh, him," said Joe, in a tone which indicated pronounced antipathy to his parent. "Do you know him? Are you one of his sort?" Now don't try to be insulting, my boy, or I'll take you across my knee. We won't say nothing about where your father is, because in high society Wormwood Scrubbs isn't mentioned. All we'll say is that he's been unfortunate like many another man before him, and that for the present he can't come and go as he likes. But he has still got a father's heart, Joe, and there are times when he worries about his family and about there being no one with them to keep an eye on them and see they grow up a credit to him. He has been particularly worried about you, Joe. So when I was coming away he asked me to look you up if I had time, and let him know how you was getting on, seeing that no one of his family has gone near him for a matter of 3 years or so, though there is one regular visiting day each week." "I don't want to see him no more," said Joe. "He's no good." "That's a nice way for a boy to talk about his own father," said Mr. Kemp in a reproving tone. "I don't know what the young generation is coming to." "If you want to send him word about me, you can tell him that I'm not going to be a thief," said Joe defiantly. "No," said Mr. Kemp tauntingly, "you'd sooner be a nark." "Yes, I would," said the boy. "And that's what you are now," declared the man wrathfully. "You're a nark for that fellow Crewe. I know all about you." "I'm earning an honest living," said Joe. "As a nark," said Mr. Kemp with a sneer. "I'm earning an honest living," said the boy doggedly. So much of his youth had been spent among the criminal classes that he still retained the feeling that there was an indelible stigma attached to those individuals described as narks. "How can anyone earn a respectable, honest living by being a nark?" asked Mr. Kemp contemptuously. "And more than that, it's one of the best men that ever breathed that you are a spying on. I'll have you know that he's a friend of mine. That is to say, he's done things for me that I ain't likely to forget. There's nothing I won't do for him, if the chance comes my way. I'll see that no harm happens to him through you and your Mr. Crewe. You've got to stop this here spying. Stop it at once, do you understand? For if you don't, by God, I'll deal with you so that you'll do no more spying in this world. And I'll have you and your master know that I'm a man what means what he says." Mr. Kemp shook his fist angrily at Joe as he moved away to the door of the loft after having delivered his menacing warning. "My last words to you is, stop it," he said, as he turned to go down the stairs. Half an hour later Mr. Kemp entered the lounge of Verney's Hotel as though in quest for someone. Most of the hotel guests had finished their after dinner coffee and liquors, and the hall was comparatively empty, but a few who remained raised their eyes in well bred protest at the intrusion of a member of the lower orders into the corridor of an exclusive hotel. Mr. Kemp felt somewhat out of place, and he stared about the luxuriously furnished lounge with a look in which awe mingled with admiration. Before he could advance further, a liveried porter of massive proportions came up to him and barred the way. "Now, now, my man," said the porter haughtily, "what do you think you are doing here? This ain't your place, you know. You've made a mistake. Out you go." "I want to see Mr. Holymead," said Mr. Kemp in a gruff voice. Verney's was such a high class hotel that seedy looking persons seldom dared to put a foot within the palatial entrance. The porter, unused to dealing with the obtrusive, impecunious type to which he believed Mr. Kemp to belong, made the mistake of trying to argue with him. "Want to see Mr. Holymead?" he repeated. "How do you know he's here? Who told you? What do you want to see him for?" "What's that got to do with you?" retorted Mr. Kemp. "You don't think Mr. Holymead would like me to discuss his business with the likes of you? That ain't what you're here for. You go and tell Mr. Holymead that someone wants to see him.